Hi, this is Tamara from mooglyblog.com, and in this video, I'm going to be demonstrating how to crochet the summer staple sweater, which is a free pattern you'll find on mooglyblog.com. To make this pattern, you will need a US eye hook, 5.5 millimeter, or whatever gets you gauge. And for the yarn, I used Bernat Softy Cotton, which is a really lovely 3 lightweight cotton acrylic blend. I used several colors, 4 of them total, as you can see here. The white, which is clear white, the yellow, which is golden, the light blue is dusk sky, and the dark blue is seaside blue. But of course, you can use whatever colors you like. I also do recommend that you use stitch markers when you make this pattern. It just makes it a lot easier to assemble. You'll also, of course, need your standard crochet supplies, a pair of scissors, and a yarn needle. So let's take a closer look at the finished summer staple sweater. Here you can see it modeled on my daughter Riley, who normally wears a size small or medium. This pattern comes in 2 sizes, extra small to extra large, and 2X to 5X. I normally wear an extra large, and I've tried on the same sweater, and while it does fit me a little smaller, it does still fit. So this is a great loose pattern with an oversized fit to fit a range of sizes. Now, as you can see, this sweater is a little bit big to fit on our little filming table here, but we'll try and kind of take a tour of it as we go. The body is made in 2 pieces, one half and then the other half. And this right here is the first row of each half. Then we work out, we work a couple extra rows here for the underarm. Then we do some seaming on the front and the back. You can see the back seam right there, some seaming along the sides. And then we add our sleeves right onto the body of the sweater. Finally, you can add this kangaroo style pocket and some fringe if you desire. But both the pocket and the fringe are, of course, optional. And if you'd like, you could even leave off the sleeves or change the length to really customize the sweater to be your own. And of course, you can change up the striping colors and layout however you like. You could even use a solid or a self-striping yarn if you wanted to. So let's go ahead and now take a look at the written pattern. Now here's my printed out version of the summer staple sweater pattern. And you can see that you will need 1 to 2 balls of the golden, 4 to 5 balls of the white, and 1 to 2 balls of the dark blue, and 1 ball of the light blue, depending on what size you make. You can see here too, I've included some options if you prefer to use different stitches for some of the stitches I've used in this pattern. I also want to point out that there is a schematic. And just what happened to print out on 2 rows for me here, which is a little unfortunate, but we'll make it work here. Here you can see the schematic, and rather than try and put those measurements on there, I just put some letters, so you can come back here and see A is 11 inches for the smaller size, 14 inches for the larger size, B, 12 inches for the smaller size, 16.5 for the larger, and so on. So this will help you make sure that your sizes are the right size. Now, for the body, as I was describing on the full sweater, we do make 2 of those pieces, and this is what they look like when they're done. These right here, these straight lines in the middle, that would be the row 1 of each piece, and these would be the final rows of each piece when you make them. So when you go to assemble them, you want to make sure that those row 1s are facing each other because that will become the center seam of our sweater. You can see here the purple zigzags represent the front seam, the blue zigzags represent the back seam, and then we seam up the sides, red to red and green to green. These sections right here will become our armholes when we add our arms. So let's go ahead and get started with our summer staple sweater. So first, let's make a few foundation single crochets. I start with a slip knot on my hook, and then I chain 2. Then what I want to do is insert my hook under that back hump, not the back loop, but rather under the back hump at the back of that very first chain that I made. And now these are the way I make these stitches. You may see different methods and you may prefer a different one. However you like it is fine. What I'm going to do now with my hook inserted is yarn over with my yarn, pull that loop up and through, and this loop then becomes the chain at the bottom of my first single crochet. Then I yarn over and pull a loop up and through to begin my stitch. Now with 2 loops on my hook, I yarn over and pull through 2 to make my first single crochet of the row. Then, depending on size, you'll need to add more. So I'm going to go under the bottom 2 loops, right there at the base of that first stitch I made, basically that chain we made at the bottom. yarn over and pull a loop through. We want to pull this up nice and high, and that will be right there. That is the chain at the bottom of my second stitch. So we yarn over and pull up a loop to start our stitch, yarn over and pull through 2 to finish, and now we have a total of 2 single crochets. Let's do one more together. I'll go under the 2 loops at the bottom of the previous stitch, yarn over and pull up my loop, yarn over and pull through that first loop to start the stitch, yarn over and pull through 2 to finish it. So now we have a total of 3 single crochets. So continue making your row 1 with the number of single crochets called for in the size of the sweater that you're making. Now for demonstration purposes today, I'm going to stop at 21 stitches. And if you want to adjust the summer staple sweater for size or to make it a custom fit for you, then you can start with any multiple of 2 plus 1, basically an odd number of stitches, and you'll be all set. So to continue with row 2, what we're going to do is we're going to start with a chainless starting double crochet. If you prefer, you can start with a chain 3 or your preferred double crochet substitute, whatever you like to do instead of a chain 3 if there's something else you prefer as opposed to that or the chainless starting double crochet. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and turn, and then I want to pull my loop up to about the height of a double crochet stitch. Then I will secure that with my finger right at the top so it doesn't move around. Then I will yarn over with that loop itself, go right into that very first stitch, yarn over with my working yarn and pull up a loop. You'll notice I still have that loop secured under my finger there. So now I'm going to yarn over and pull through that first loop and behind the loop that I wound around my hook. Then I can finally release that stitch, yarn over and pull through the last 2 loops. So then that would count as my first double crochet of the row. And I find that it just looks a bit better than a chain 3, but you can use whatever you prefer. After you've made whatever double crochet or chain 3 there you like, then we simply chain 1, skip the next stitch, that'd be that one right there, and double crochet in the stitch after that. And that is our basic mesh pattern that will take us all the way on across for row 2. We chain 1, skip the next stitch, and double crochet in the stitch after that. Continue on across until you get all the way across for the row 2. So when you get to the end of row 2, you should have a double crochet in the very last stitch. Okay, so at the end of row 2, you should have a much longer strip of mesh that looks just like this. Double crochets with chain 1s and skipped stitches in between. After that, we're ready for row 3, which is pretty darn simple. We simply chain 1 and turn, or turn and chain 1, however you like to do it, and then single crochet in each stitch and chain space across. So you can see I just single crocheted in the first stitch, but after that, I'll just single crochet right in that chain space. You don't have to work into the chain itself. You can go right into that space underneath, pull up your loop, and make your single crochet. If you'd prefer, you can work directly into the chain. Some people really do prefer the look of it, but for this pattern, I think it's a lot simpler and more enjoyable to crochet into the chain space. However you like to do it, crochet on across until you end up with a single crochet in that very last stitch of the row. Okay, and here we are at the end of row 3 with a single crochet in each stitch and in each chain space across. So your stitch count for row 3 should be the same as your stitch count for row 1. After that, if we pop back over here to the written pattern, I pull it up, you'll see that we're just continuing repeating rows 2 and 3 for a total of 31 rows for the smaller size and more rows for the larger size. Again, you'll need to check your written pattern depending on which size you're making. However, while you're making those repeats, this is where those stripes come in. We switch to color A, or we continue rather with color A. We do rows 1 through 3 in color A, then we switch to color B for the smaller size, then C, then B, then A, then back to D again. Then we have a few rows that we use to create these sides right here. So on our little swatch, I'm going to go ahead and jump on down here to what would be row 32 on our smaller size. But after we've done all those, just working even for rows 2 and 3, and we're ready to make those little sides, you'll find that beginning right after the color changes. So that's where we're going to jump to right now on our little swatch. Okay, so when you've built up working even and you're ready to add those little sides, we move on to that section of the pattern. So we begin with a chainless starting double crochet because that first row is going to be a double crochet mesh row. So we make that just as we did before, going right into that first stitch, or again, you can use whatever double crochet substitute you prefer. Then we're going to chain one, skip one, and double crochet in the next stitch, just as we were doing before on our mesh rows, but we're not going to work all the way across the row. We're going to stop approximately a third of the way along the row. Again, this is a little different depending on what size you are making, so you'll need to check the written pattern to see how many repeats of these double crochets you make. But on our little swatch, I'm going to go ahead and stop right there and say that I have crocheted that first little bit of that side already. After that, we simply chain one and turn, or turn and chain one, and work the single crochet rows, just as we were doing before. We're maintaining that same stitch pattern as we were doing before as we make these little bits on the side. Now, the larger size has more rows to build up these sides even more for a little more width around the body, around the torso. But on our little swatch here and for the smaller size, it's only 2 rows here in essentially what is the armpit or the underneath the arm along the side of the body. So for our smaller size, I will go ahead and break our yarn here, and then we need to come in and add the other side. Okay, so this is where I cut my yarn and left off on that first side. But now I want to turn it over so that we can make essentially what is the other side of that underarm or armpit section there. So we were moving this direction, as you can see here, when we made that double crochet row, and then we left the rest of these stitches unworked. So what we want to do now is we need to count out a number of stitches before we begin that other side. Again, the number of stitches in between is going to depend on the size you're making. For instance, on the smaller size, we skip 83 stitches. So go ahead and count out however many stitches you need to skip, and then we're going to join with a double crochet in the stitch after that. And what we're going to be doing there is just basically mirroring what we have right here. So however many stitches we had right there is the same number of stitches we want on this side, because those are going to come together to form that side of our sweater. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my yarn here, and I'm going to join with a double crochet. So I'm going to pull this out of the way a little bit. I'm going to hold on to that tail end of the yarn with my hook hand and my non-hook fingers there, and I will get my hook situated, yarn over twice. Then I find that stitch I want to go into. So if you need to mark that with a stitch marker after you're counting, whatever works for you, so you've got that marked. We go right into that stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2, and yarn over and pull through that one and behind the loop I was holding on to, and we can let that go. And we can just weave that in when we're done, but now we've started with a double crochet. Again, if you don't like this method, you can join with a slip stitch and chain 3, or do it however you like to do. Just get a double crochet in there however you like. After that, we continue on with our pattern as before. Chain 1, skip the next stitch, and double crochet in the stitch after that. Now, while we were making our body stitches here, you'll see that all our mesh stitches, all our double crochets line up. They should all be nicely stacked on top of each other. When we get to the sleeves, we'll be doing some decreasing, so that will not always be the case. So definitely keep that in mind. In fact, it'll be rare if our sleeve stitches stack up on top of each other. But while we're making the body pieces, we want those double crochets lined up right on top of each other, just like so. So you can see here for our other side, we've gotten all the way here to the end. So we want to make sure we do everything we did on the other side. So we chain 1 and then single crochet back on across. So just work into each one of these stitches, leave these stitches in the middle remaining unworked, and I'll see you when we get to the end of this little row here. Okay, so I've worked my row of single crochet across, and now I'm done with this side. Again, if you're making the larger size, there will be, I believe, 4 more rows, but you're just working back and forth in this same mesh pattern that we've already established throughout the rest of the sweater. So I'll go ahead and break that yarn as well. And then normally I would go ahead and weave in all my ends right here for these. And then, of course, I've got a second one of these to make. We start the body with 2 pieces. So let's go ahead and weave in our ends. And after you do that, you may want to go ahead and block those pieces out to the schematic given in the written pattern. That will just make it a little bit easier when it's time to join those 2 pieces together, if you can make sure that those are the same size. Okay, so when you've got your 2 body pieces made, it's time to lay them out and do some of the assembly. You can see here I've laid them out so that they're the same direction. You can tell by those middle stitches are all facing the same direction. If I flipped one over, that would be a really great clue right there. You can see right there, those are different. What we want to do is make sure that they're both facing up. Now, which side is up is totally up to you. It's genuinely which side of the fabric you prefer. With your striping, you might prefer the way that this side looks as opposed to the other side. Right now, totally up to you. Just try and make sure that they're on the same side facing up right now before you begin your assembly. You also want to lay them out like this so that these little bits are sticking out to the sides. You can see that here again on our assembly. On our schematic rather, you can see how I've laid these out in that same shape. So now it is time to do the seaming that we see there in those zigzags. And the seaming method that I like to use for these is the mattress stitch. But before you begin seaming, especially on your full-size sweater, maybe not if you're making one this size, but on your full-size sweater, I recommend that you grab those stitch markers and really use that to help hold those seams together. Now, this is the front and back of our sweater. We need to make sure that we leave a hole there in the middle for the head. Otherwise, you're just making a funky little blanket. So what we want to do is really match up those stitches. And of course, you should have the same number of stitches in each of these rows. They were both the row one of your identical pieces. And really use your stitch markers. Let me get that in focus there. Use your stitch markers to match up those pieces all the way along. And you want to make sure too, whether you use a special color, maybe, use red or something, or a special stitch marker to help you remember if needed, where to stop sewing. So you're going to sew up a section from the front seam there, from the bottom hem rather, for the front seam, and then from the back hem for the back seam. But again, we want to make sure that we have those center stitches unworked for the head to come through in our sweater. So of course, I've got some measurements in the written pattern for this. So you can measure up from each end for your seam. But here on our little guy, those aren't going to quite translate. So I'm just kind of eyeballing it here. There we are. But now you can kind of see how that comes together there. So we would seam, say, from here to here for our front, and then from here to here for our back. And then that right there is that little section for our our head and neck to come through with that V right there in front. So let's go ahead and cut off some yarn and do a little bit of mattress stitch seaming. So the first thing you'll want to do is cut a length of yarn approximately 2 to 3 times the length of the seam that you wish to sew closed. Then thread it on your favorite yarn needle. Then I like to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and take out this very first stitch marker here. It's kind of in my way. I know which ones I'm starting in here. What I want to do is find the first stitch of one row here at the end, right at that bottom hem, and pull my yarn through. And I don't want to pull it all the way through. Otherwise, of course, I'm just pulled it all the way through. Make sure you leave a little tail there. Grab onto it if you need to. And then I want to find that same stitch on the opposite piece there, right facing opposite, and come from behind through that stitch. Okay. Not going to worry about getting those too close right now. I'm going to let those hang. Then I'm going to come back to that first piece and come from behind through that next stitch. And then I will pull that around there so we don't get tangled, find that same stitch on the second piece and come from behind through that stitch. Now, if I pull on these tail ends, that seam will close up and it really will disappear. That's my favorite thing about the mattress stitch. If you use the same color yarn to do your seaming that you're sewing into, it really will disappear pretty easily. So just keep working from behind through your pairs of stitches. Get that through there. There we go. It's a little awkward trying to hold it open so you can see it on camera. Normally when I would sew this, my hands would be all in the way so you wouldn't be able to see it. So when you do it yourself, don't try and necessarily hold your hands like that. But whatever works for you to get that needle right from behind on those pairs of stitches, just keep working your way right up until the measurement indicated for your size of the sweater. Go ahead and move that last one out of the way there. Let's do one more pair here and we'll call this the front of our sweater. So there's the first one. There's the matching stitch on the other side. When I get to the end, here, when I say I'm done, I would like to just send it right back to the inside through that first stitch again. Go ahead and go from the outside for that last one, just tightens it right up. And then you can weave in those ends just as you normally would. Then for the back seam, you just go ahead and do that again. Start again at that bottom hem. So for however many inches indicated for your size for the pattern, and then you'll have the back seam of your sweater. So far we've gotten through the first 3 steps of our assemble body section of our pattern. What we have here is we've got our front seam and our back seam. And even here on our little example, I tried to make that back seam a little taller than the front seam. I did this, just because you want to come close to the neck and the back and leave the front a little bit more open. But if you prefer a little bit more modesty or a little less, you can definitely adjust that seam as preferred. So before you weave in those ends, you might want to go ahead and try it on. We've got our little head hole left there. So now it's time to go ahead and fold it and seam up the sides. So I'm going to go ahead and turn over to the wrong side here, whatever I've designated as the wrong side. And I'm going to fold it this way so that those sections there on the sides match up just like that. Just so now you can see the little vest. We've got our head hole right there where it should be. We've got our armholes there ready to get our sleeves added. And here we've got the sides of our sweater. So we'll just turn that over and match up those stitches. And again, I do recommend, especially on the full size one, before you start seaming, that you use your stitch markers to match up all those stitches along the side. You don't have to measure for this one. We're going to seam all the way up to where those little added sides, right up until where those stop. We just want to leave all that open right there for our armholes. So if you decided that you would prefer to have this as a sleeveless sweater, then after you do this side seam, you can skip right on to the pocket and the fringe, whatever parts you're deciding to add to your project. Otherwise, we'll be adding the sleeves after this. So I will go ahead and match up one side, then I match up the other, and then I use the mattress stitch to seam them up just as I did for the center and the back. Now, of course, you might be using different colors for these. I've chosen just to make this sample all in the yellow so far. But as I say, you want to use the same color for doing your actual seaming, whatever color that is that you ended up on. So if you changed the color pattern for this, if you're using different colors, your own color choices, just make sure that you try and do your seaming in the same color that you are stitching into. So after you've got those sides stitched up, then it's time for the sleeves. Okay, so I've sewn up the side seam of my sweater, one of them at least. So let's go ahead and move on to this sleeve. Now, normally when you add the sleeve for the first few rounds, you're going to be using the same color as you finished in. You want to be using the same color. Normally I'd want to use yellow here to crochet into yellow. If this was blue, I'd want to use the blue. I'm going to use a contrasting color right now just so that my stitches are a little bit easier to see. But since we're working to the edge here on your real sweater, you don't want to be able to see those stitches very distinctly. So you just want to make sure you're using the same color here. Now I'm going to be joining with a single crochet. So I've already put a slip knot on my hook. If you prefer, you can join with a slip knot, chain one, and then single crochet. So what we want to do is find that seam that we just made. Now, because I made a row of double crochet and a row of single crochet, I can kind of count those out from the side there and find that seam. If you want to, when you're sewing it up, you can add a stitch marker to help you find that later. So what I want to do now is just insert my hook right at the top of that seam. Get my working yarn all sorted out here. There we are. And then I will just yarn over and pull a loop up and through, and then I can yarn over and finish that single crochet. So now what you want to do, depending on the size you're making, you want to work a single crochet in the side of every single crochet row and 2 single crochets in the side of every double crochet row. And we keep doing that until we get back to those unworked stitches that we skipped there before we added our little sides. So on our little sample here and on the smaller size, we'll just have one of each, 1 single crochet row and 1 double crochet row, but you'll have several of those on the bigger size. So when we come to the side of our single crochet row here, we simply work a single crochet right into the edge. Sometimes that can take a little bit of pushing, as I'm sure you know if you've worked into the edge before. But we just want to sort of eyeball and spread out those stitches as best we can. And again, if I were working this in the yellow, it would look a lot neater on the finished sweater. I'm just working it in a contrast color right here so that you can see how that looks a little bit easier here and see where I'm putting my stitches. So I do like to take my time when I can, when I'm working to the edge here, and get those stitches to look as evenly as we can. But again, if they're in the same color, they'll just disappear on into the sweater. So once you've worked along the sides of those rows, let me pull this back out here. You can see now I've come back down to those skipped stitches on our body. So when we get to those, what we want to do is just go ahead and work a single crochet in each one of those skipped stitches. So now we're working a single crochet into the tops of those other single crochets. So we simply single crochet in each skipped stitch across. The number of these will of course depend on the size that you're making. Okay, so here I am in that last skipped stitch for my little sample. Sort of straighten it back out here. We're going to take our time, make sure we're where we think we are. So here I've got a double crochet to work into the side too, and then one more row of single crochet. Again, if you're making the bigger size, you'll have a total of 6 rows to work into the side of. So when we get to that double crochet, we want to work 2 single crochets right into the side of it. There's 1, and there's 2. You can see here I'm sort of splitting the stitch to put those in there. That's how I like to do it. If you prefer to go around the whole stitch, you can, but I find it is a little bit bulkier for this pattern. So we want to finish it off though. Make sure we get that last single crochet in the side of the final single crochet row. That brings us right back to that very first one we made there. And we've worked, if I get this straightened out here, kind of hold it out, you can see now we've worked all the way around that armhole. And again, it's a little messy maybe in this contrasting color, but if it was in the same color, that would blend right in with these stitches on your finished sweater. So when we get to the end of round 1 of our sleeves here, what we want to do is go ahead and join with a slip stitch to that first single crochet we made, but we're going to be working in something I call turned rounds. Or even some people call them joined rows. Different names, same effect. We're going to pull these stitch markers back out here for this though. And what I want you to do before you join with a slip stitch is go ahead and put a stitch marker in the first and last stitch of the round. And we're going to carry each of these 2 stitch markers up with us as we make this sleeve. And what this will do is it will allow us to find that first and last stitch of each round and not get confused by the slip stitch and accidentally count that slip stitch as a stitch. When you're working in turned rounds, that can be a very, very easy thing to have happen. And honestly, it can be an easy thing to have happen even if you're not turning your rounds. So if that's something you struggle with, this is a great technique. So I've got my stitch markers in place. I'm going to go ahead and slip stitch that first stitch I made there. And then rather than chaining up and continuing around, I'm going to go ahead and turn. So round 2 of the sleeve will actually be worked from inside the sleeve. The same will be true for all your even rounds. We're going to turn at the end of every round of the sleeve. I'm going to pull that little tail end through there so it's out of our way. So the reason we work in these turned rounds is that it prevents that underarm seam that tends to take off and sort of wind around the sleeve. If you've made a sweater before, or if you've made any joined project, when you work in the round, you tend to get a slanted seam. Depending on whether you're right-handed or left-handed will determine which way it slants. But by turning our rounds, we keep that seam, really straight. And we also keep it right at the bottom of the arm. So it just makes for a better looking sweater at the end of the day. So I've already turned here to work from the inside of the sweater. And again, this is where having those stitch markers is going to come in really handy because it would be very easy to think that this is the first stitch of this round. But of course, that is our slip stitch. We've got our first stitch marked right there. So to begin round 2 of our sleeve, I want to do another chainless starting double crochet. Again, if you prefer, you can substitute your chain 3. But I'm going to work right into that first marked stitch there. Thank goodness for that stitch marker. It tells me right where to go. So as I finished that stitch, that is now the first stitch of the round. So I'm going to go ahead and move that stitch marker on up to this stitch. So now that stitch will be marked for us as we come around to finish this round. After that, it's that same mesh pattern that we've been making for the rest of the sweater. Chain 1, skip the next stitch, and double crochet in the stitch after that. Then chain 1, skip the next stitch, and double crochet in the stitch after that. Okay, so I'm almost all the way around my little sleeve here. So I just want to point out is that I chain 1, skip the next stitch, and double crochet in the stitch after that. don't get confused and panic because you see one more stitch there. That stitch marker, that's our last stitch. Because we're making our mesh, but now we're in the round, we want to chain one and skip that very last stitch. And then slip stitch to that first stitch we made, the one with the stitch marker in it there. So that one is still down there. Don't let that confuse you. That chain one above it there is the last stitch, so to speak, for our round 2 of our sleeves. So I'll go ahead and just put that stitch marker right in that chain space right there. Does that make sense? All right, so that way we can get our mesh pattern going for our sleeves. Then it is time for round 3 of our sleeves. Put my hook right back in there. So I'm going to turn again. We're on an odd numbered row, so I want to work from the outside of the sweater, the right side of the sweater. And now I'm simply going to chain one, and I want to start with a single crochet 2 together in the first 2 stitches. That first stitch is going to be that chain space. So we go into the chain space and pull up a loop. And then we go into that first double crochet and pull up a loop. Then we finish it off as we normally do, yarn over and pull through 2. And now this is the first stitch for round 3. So I'll go ahead and grab that stitch marker and move it right on up. There we are. Then we simply continue to single crochet in each stitch and chain space around. So I'm going to go right to that next chain space and then that next stitch until we get to the last 2 stitches where we'll be doing another single crochet 2 together. Now I mentioned you'll continue single crocheting around to get to those last 2 stitches. But remember, we're working into those chain spaces too. So we've got the chain space and our last marked stitch left. We're going to single crochet in those 2. So again, we go into that chain space, pull up our loop, and then go into that last marked stitch and pull up a loop and yarn over and pull through 2 to finish. And then right away, I want to go ahead and move that stitch marker up into our last stitch before I make that slip stitch. But I know that I can put our slip stitch right in the top of that marked stitch. There we are. So row 4 is just like row 2. We're working again from the inside of the sweater, and we start again with our chainless starting double crochet right in that first marked stitch there. So again, as soon as we've got that one finished, I do recommend that you move that stitch marker right on up. These will save you a lot of heartache at the end of the day. There we go. Then we simply, get that sorted there, chain one, skip the next stitch, go ahead and sort this out if you need to, and double crochet in the stitch after that. Chain one, skip the next stitch, double crochet in the stitch after that. And here is where I want to point out something that I mentioned earlier in the video, that when we were making those body stitches, all our double crochets were sort of lined up right on top of each other. And now that we are in our sleeves, whoops, I just dropped the whole thing there. Let's try that again. Now that we are in our sleeves, you can see I'm actually working in between. They've become offset. So our sleeves are going to be largely like that, but that's okay. It's really not that noticeable. You don't really notice the difference, I don't think, in the pattern when you're wearing it or in the finished sweater. And it's just a little difference in the pattern. Sleeves are different than the body, but the overall effect is largely the same. So just as before, we want to keep working our way around here for row 4. Make sure that we skip over that last marked stitch. So it looks like I'm already at the end there. I've got my chain one. So then I will just go ahead and join with a slip stitch to that first marked stitch. Try and get that stitch marker, I think, on the other side of my slip stitch. It wants to wiggle around on me a little bit. There we go. And then we can turn and go back the other direction for round 5. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that stitch marker and just set it aside for a moment. We know we're going to be starting in that chain space. So we're going to chain one again and then go into that chain space and then into the stitch after that for another single crochet 2 together. So basically on all our odd numbered rows, we are going to be working from the outside of the sweater, and we're going to begin and end each round with a single crochet 2 together decrease. On our double crochet mesh rows, we simply work even. So we continue doing that along with the color changes called for your size until we get to the end of the sleeve, ending on a single crochet row. So let me pull that written pattern up again. You can see here, this again is for the smaller size. With the larger size, there are more rows, but you just repeat rows 4 and 5 all the way to the end of the sleeve. And here you can see I've got all those color choices, or color changes rather, laid out just as I made them. But of course, you can change up those stripes to whatever you like. And at the very end, you should have a smaller number of stitches, obviously, than you started with, because we're decreasing on all of those odd numbered rows. So once you've got both sleeves made, finished off, there's nothing to do other than finish it off with that last single crochet round. Then it's time to go to the pocket and fringe instructions, which are below the larger size instructions on the blog if you're following along on the blog. The pocket and fringe instructions are the same for all sizes, and they start with a foundation double crochet. Okay, so to make the pocket for the summer staple sweater, we start with a row of foundation double crochets, 44 in total. If you'd prefer to avoid the foundation double crochet, you can make a row of double crochet however you like, with chains and then double crochets. You can skip 3, skip 2, however you like to do it. As long as you end up with 44 double crochets at the end, it's all good. But I'll do a quick demonstration of our foundation double crochet here right now. I've got my slip knot on the hook. I'm going to start with a chain of 2, and then I'm going to yarn over, and I'm going to again go into that bottom hump of the first chain there. Then I yarn over and pull up a loop. And again, this loop right there becomes the chain at the bottom of the double crochet. Sort out my yarn here. There we are. Then we yarn over and pull through just that chain to start our double crochet. So then we can yarn over and pull through 2. Oops, just 2. And yarn over and pull through 2. And again, like all the rest of these fancier stitches, I do have separate tutorials for them linked at the link in the description. So here is our first foundation double crochet. So to make the other 43, what I want to do is yarn over, go under those 2 loops at the bottom of the stitch, that chain again, just like when we were making the single crochet ones. Yarn over and pull up a loop. That loop will become the chain at the bottom of our second foundation double crochet. So then we yarn over and pull through that chain to start our stitch. Yarn over and pull through 2, and yarn over and pull through 2. So let's make one more. I'm going to yarn over, go right into the bottom of the previous stitch under those 2 loops right at the base. Yarn over and pull up a loop. Make sure you pull that one up nice and high so it's as high as the rest. Yarn over and pull through just that loop. Then yarn over and pull through 2, and yarn over and pull through 2. So now we have a total of 3 foundation double crochets. So keep making those, or however you like to do them, until you have a total of 44 for row 1. Now, the pocket itself is made in simple double crochet rows with color changes every 2 rows for some simple stripes. So I'm not going to demonstrate all of that today because, again, it's simply double crochet. However, rows 5 through, I believe it is 10, yes, rows 5 through 10, again, we'd want to do some decreasing on the ends to create that kangaroo pocket shape, which I'll show you again here on the finished pocket at the end. But after you've made your row of 44 and you've made your first 4 rows all worked even, then it's time to add some decreases on those ends. So what I like to do is a chainless starting double crochet, 2 together. So again, you can do these however you like. If you have a different double crochet 2 together substitute that you like to do first thing in a row, you can do that however you like. My other favorite one is to chain 2, skip the first stitch, and simply work a double crochet into the second stitch. I find that one works really well, but I also really like this method. So what I'm going to do now is, again, I'm going to pull up my loop to the height of a double crochet and secure it with my finger. Then I'm going to yarn over with that loop itself, go into the first stitch, yarn over and pull up my loop, yarn over, pull through that loop, and behind the loop I wound around my stitch, or around my hook. Now with 2 loops still left on the hook there, I'm going to yarn over again, go into the next stitch, yarn over, pull up that loop, yarn over again, pull through 2 loops, and then finally yarn over, and pull through all 3 of those last loops on the hook. So there you can see that's my chainless starting double crochet, 2 together. So again, you can use whatever method you like, or you can give this one some practice and see if you like it too. After you've got that made, we simply double crochet in each stitch across until we get to those last 2 stitches where we do another one of those double crochet 2 togethers. But of course, at the end of the row, it can just be a standard one. We don't have to do the fancy standing stitch or starting stitch to get the height. So let's see here on our little swatch, we're already at those last 2 stitches. So to finish it off, I would yarn over, go in that second to last stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2, yarn over again, go into that last stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2, yarn over and pull through 3 to finish. So we work the first few rows even, then we work the next several rows with those decreases to pull in for that kangaroo styling, and then the last few rows are worked even again. So to finish it off then, when you have finished crocheting the pocket itself, we simply chain 1, turn, and single crochet evenly all the way around the pocket, which gives us a really nice edge to sew onto our finished top. So on my little swatch here, of course, this isn't exactly the same as our pocket, but I just want to show you anytime you come to a corner. So our decreases are pretty gradual, so you shouldn't have to do too much right there where the decreases start. But at the top corners and at the bottom corners of your pocket, essentially the 4 corners, if you will, where your first and last stitches of each row are, then what I would recommend that what you do to turn the corner is just work 3 single crochets in that very last stitch there. So there's 3 in that one. You can see that really pushed us around the edge there. So now I'm ready to work into the edge. And here you don't need a specific number of stitches or anything like that. It's just whatever looks good to you. So when you get back down here to the bottom of your foundation row, go ahead and put, your 3 stitches there in that last stitch. So whatever gets you around that corner. If there's a different kind of corner that you actually prefer, you can use that. Some people like a single crochet, chain 1 or 2, and then single crochet. And depending on the project, sometimes I prefer that too. But then you simply single crochet right along the foundation chain, then do that again, work your corner again, up the other side, work another corner, join, and you will have made a nice little border that you can sew onto your sweater. So let's go ahead and take another look at the finished sweater pocket. Okay, so here we've got that finished kangaroo pocket. You can see I changed color every 2 rows, worked even for those first few rows, then decreased for a little bit, and then worked even again right at the end. You can also see that round of single crochet I did all the way around, and then I simply used that round to help sew through to sew it to the sweater. Now, you want to make sure that you leave those pocket openings open. So you only want to sew along those even sides around the bottom and up to there again, and then just right across the top. You can come down a little bit on the sides there if you prefer to. Again, it's your sweater. Attach it however you like. You can see there I've got plenty of room for my hands and my goodies. And this is a little bit more solid fabric. We didn't use the mesh, just a solid double crochet. But I think that was really good because then your pocket is a little bit more private. You don't have things falling out like you might have if we used the mesh. So if I open it up here, you can see a little bit of that seam where I was sewing into the blue. It's just a simple back stitch. Don't have to be crazy neat because of course this is on the inside of the sweater. But we just simply sew that right to the outside actually of our sweater, of course, and wherever you like to put it. I sort of pinned it on and then tried it on, so you can do that too. It's just a couple inches down there from the top of our center seam, a few inches up from the bottom. I just sort of eyeballed it. Like I say, I put it on there with some stitch markers, tried the sweater on, put my hands in there, made sure I liked where that pocket laid, and then sewed it on. And then finally, the only thing left to do is add the fringe. Now, the final step is to add the fringe, which is optional. I know not everybody's into fringe, but if you are, this is a great top for it. If you're not, feel free to leave it off, and you can even add a little bit of a bottom seam there, maybe even some ribbing, whatever you like to do to finish off your sweater. For this one, I decided to go with the fringe, and I simply added it on to the edge here. You can see I added it right to the bottom side there of the row of every other double crochet row all the way around the sweater. Looks like I've got one piece there trying to hide out inside. There we go. So these are really, really simple fringes or tassels, whatever you want to call them, that I've tied on here. They're just tied right onto the sweater. So if you find that they get worn out or dirty, again, fringe has all its own challenges. These are really easy to switch out if you'd like. So to make these, what I did was I simply cut 15 inches of yarn. Now this has already been trimmed out. This is one I just stole back off the sweater. But you want to cut 15 inches of 15-inch long strands of yarn, 4 strands for each one of these tassels. So I didn't do the math to see how many strands of yarn that was. I just kept cutting them until I had all of those spaces filled. You take each group of 4, fold it in half. You want to match up those ends as best you can here. I've already trimmed this one, so it looks really neat. They aren't usually that neat when I cut them. And then what we want to do is take our hook, and where you want to go ahead and add one of these tassels, come from behind through that space. Now you can see I'm adding it just right to that double crochet, right over the double crochet itself at the end of this row. Put that fold, the center of that fold, right over your hook. Pull that through. And then I like to go ahead and just drop my hook right here, and I use my fingers to grab those yarn ends and pull them right on through that loop. And you just pull right down on it. You can see it creates a really nice and I think really attractive banded fringe right there. So once you've got your fringe added all the way around, what I recommend you do is you lay them all out nice as you can here and sort of match up all your fabric, get them all laid out nicely. And then you can use a rotary cutter. That's hard to say today. A rotary cutter and a cutting board and a a yardstick to sort of lay that out and cut those all out nice and even. Now that's if you like a really even look. If you like it a little bit more free form, then you can absolutely use a pair of scissors, whatever works for you. You'll also notice on some of these, I did distress the end of the fringe a little bit, just to give it a little bit more beachy, summery, well-worn vibe. This yarn worked pretty well with this. If you like this look, you can add this to your own. I simply took, there goes my hook's trying to roll into the scene here, but I took my yarn needle and I simply sort of divided the yarn here. You can sort of work up it, just kind of like getting tangles out of long hair if you've ever had to do that before. And you can sort of tease apart the different strands of this yarn. Again, this is Bernat Softy Cotton, and I really enjoyed using this. It's a cotton acrylic blend, and it just feels really great. I know this is going to be great to wear year round, but it also creates this really great sort of fuzzy tasseled look if you want to play with that yourself. Or of course, you can leave them nice and neat, whatever you prefer. And that's how to crochet the summer staple sweater, a free pattern on mooglyblog.com. Please again go to the link in the description where you can find both right and left-handed video tutorials, as well as a link to the written pattern and all of the supplies you need, as well as the other video tutorials for the special stitches I've shown you here today. Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.